I agreed to be her fake fiancé. Then she slipped a real ring onto my finger. She set a small blue velvet box on my workbench, popped it open, and said, "I need you to wear this for 6 weeks and pretend you love me." I looked at the ring. Then I looked at her. Then I picked up the ring anyway, because that's the kind of stupid, hopeful man I am. And I said, "Okay, what are the rules?" That's how it started. Let me back up, because you're going to want the whole thing. My name is Beckett Hale. I'm 31, and I run a woodworking shop out of my father's old barn on the edge of Millbrook Falls, a town small enough that the diner and the hardware store share a parking lot. I build tables. I build cabinets. I build the kind of furniture people keep for 40 years and then argue about who gets it in the divorce. It's quiet work. I like quiet work. My hands are steady, my prices are fair, and my Saturday nights involve sanding walnut and listening to the same 3 albums I've owned since college. That is not a complaint. That is a description of a man who had made peace with being alone and had gotten very, very good at it. The woman who put the ring on my workbench was Josie Calloway, and I had known her exactly the way you know someone from a town where everybody knows everybody, which is to say, not well, and also completely. She'd been 2 grades below me in school, gone off to Raleigh for a marketing job the second she turned 18, and come back 4 months ago because her grandmother, Dottie Calloway, had a bad fall and a worse diagnosis. Congestive heart failure. Slow, mean patient. The kind of thing that doesn't kill you fast. It just quietly narrows your whole life down to a hospital bed and a view of the same ceiling tile. Before I tell you how a ring on a workbench turned into the realest thing I've ever done, if you're the kind of person who believes the right person can show up disguised as a bad idea, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I've got a lot more of these stories, and I'd hate for you to miss one. All right, back to the barn. Dottie Calloway had one wish left in the world, and it wasn't subtle about it. She wanted to see Josie settled before she died. Not married necessarily. Dottie wasn't a monster, but engaged, committed. Somebody's, in the old-fashioned way that generations still measured a life by. And Josie, who had spent 4 months driving Dottie to cardiology appointments and reorganizing her pill sorter and sleeping on a pull-out couch that hated her spine, had let one comment slip during a weak moment. Something like, "If it would make you feel better, Grandma, I'm seeing someone." She was not seeing someone. She had panicked, and Dottie, thrilled, had immediately told the entire Tuesday Quilting Circle, which is the fastest communication network in the Western Hemisphere, faster than fiber optic, faster than regret. "So now the whole town thinks I'm engaged," Josie told me, standing in my barn in a paint-stained flannel that used to belong to somebody, holding that little blue box like it might bite her. "And Founder's Day is in 6 weeks. And Grandma's already told the minister, and if I show up to that festival with no ring and no man, it's going to break her heart in front of 400 people, and her heart is already breaking in the literal, medical sense. Beckett, I need this to not be the thing that kills her." "So why me?" I said, because it needed saying. She looked around the barn like the answer was hanging from the rafters. "Because you're the only man in this town who isn't going to fall in love with me and make this weird. You're steady. You keep your word. And you owe me." That last part was true, in a roundabout way. 3 years back, when my father was dying, and I was too proud and too underwater to admit I couldn't cover both his hospice bills and the shop's rent, an anonymous donor had quietly paid off 4 months of overdue rent through the church benevolence fund. It took me 2 years to find out it had been Dottie Calloway's money, routed through Josie, because Dottie liked to help people in ways that let them keep their dignity. I never got to thank either of them properly. This, apparently, was Josie cashing that in. 6 weeks, she said. Founder's Day, a few dinners, you hold my hand in public, you let my grandmother believe her granddaughter isn't going to die alone in an apartment full of throw pillows. Then after, we stage a quiet breakup. Nobody's business. Nobody gets hurt. I should have said no. I want that on the record. I am a reasonable man who understood exactly how this story goes. I said yes anyway. The first rule was that we needed a story, and Josie was terrifyingly organized about it. We'd met, we decided, at the hardware store. True. Actually, we had, back in March, when she'd bought the wrong gauge of picture wire and I'd corrected her without being asked, which she called insufferable and I called helpful. We'd started talking over coffee at the diner. We'd been quietly dating for 2 months before Dottie found out, because Josie wanted her privacy. It was, as lies go, barely a lie at all. It just moved a few real conversations 6 weeks earlier than they'd actually happened. The second rule was the ring, and the ring turned out to be the whole problem, because the ring was Dottie's own, her late husband's mother's ring, small and old and set with a garnet instead of a diamond, because that's what a machinist could afford in 1961. Josie hadn't wanted to use anything that meant something, but Dottie had pressed it into her hand 2 years ago for when the right man comes along. And using a cheap costume ring in front of a woman who could recognize her own grandmother's jewelry from across a church parking lot was not an option. So the garnet went on Josie's finger, and every time I looked at it, I felt something I had no business feeling about a woman who was very clearly, contractually, not mine. The dinners were the easy part. We were good at dinners. Josie had this habit of arguing with menus like they'd personally wronged her. Why would they call it a garden salad? Beckett, there is bacon in this. Bacon does not grow in gardens. And I found out I liked being laughed at by her more than I liked most conversations I'd had in years. We built our fake history the way you'd build a piece of furniture, joint by joint, until it held weight. Except somewhere around week 2, I noticed I wasn't performing anymore. I was just telling her things. Real things. About my father. About how quiet the barn got some nights. About how I'd stopped believing anybody would want a man who smelled like sawdust and kept his own hours and had never once, not once, learned how to make small talk at a party. You don't need small talk, she told me one night, elbow on the diner table, chin in her hand. You need someone who likes the quiet kind of talk. Those aren't the same skill. I filed that away like a splinter I couldn't get out. Dottie, for her part, was no fool, even with a failing heart. She watched us across her kitchen table with the sharp, patient eyes of a woman who had raised 4 kids and buried a husband and did not miss much. You two don't act engaged, she told us the 3rd week, sipping her decaf like she'd just dropped a live grenade on the table. Engaged people fight about towels. You two just look at each other like you're both waiting to see who says the true thing first. Neither of us had an answer for that. Josie changed the subject to green bean casserole. I let her. Here's the part that gets complicated, the part one didn't see coming even though I should have, because it's exactly the kind of thing that happens in a town this size. Josie's ex showed up. Grant Pruitt. And yes, that is genuinely the kind of name a man like that has. Had been Josie's boyfriend all through her Raleigh years, right up until 8 months ago, when he'd cheated on her with a coworker and then had the audacity to tell mutual friends that Josie was too focused on her career to notice him, which is the oldest trick in the book. Break something, then blame the person for not fighting hard enough to keep it whole. Grant had a habit of reappearing whenever Josie's life looked like it might be going well without him, and word of a hometown engagement, filtered through the Millbrook grapevine, had apparently reached Raleigh in under a week. He showed up at the diner on a Thursday like he owned the booth. Tall, expensive haircut, the kind of smile that's really just teeth doing a performance. Josie Calloway, he said, sliding in without asking. Heard you got engaged to a... His eyes flicked over my flannel, my hands, the sawdust I hadn't fully washed off. Carpenter. That's very on brand for a hometown reinvention. It's Beckett, I said, and you're in my seat. Grant looked delighted, actually delighted, the way a man looks when he's found exactly the reaction he came for. He talked for 10 minutes about how Josie always did rush things, how she'd rush their engagement conversation too, how she liked to solve problems with commitment instead of actually dealing with them. Every sentence was aimed like a blade wrapped in concern. And I watched Josie's jaw tighten, watched her go quiet in that specific way people go quiet when somebody's found the one bruise that never fully healed. I didn't raise my voice. I don't do that. I just put my hand over hers on the table, garnet ring and all, and I said, I think you should go, Grant. Josie doesn't rush things. She thinks them through longer than anybody I've ever met. That's actually the whole reason I feel lucky. It wasn't in the script. Josie looked at me like I'd said something in a language she was only just learning to translate. Grant left, but he didn't leave town, and that turned out to matter. Week 5, 3 days before Founders Day, Dottie had a bad night. Bad enough for an ambulance. Bad enough that Josie called me at 2 a.m. with a voice I'd never heard her use. Thin and scared and entirely without armor. I was at the hospital in 11 minutes, still in the shirt I'd slept in. I sat with her in a waiting room that smelled like hand sanitizer and old coffee, and somewhere around hour 3, exhausted, she put her head on my shoulder without asking, the way you only do with somebody you've stopped performing for. If she dies thinking this was real, Josie whispered, and then finds out later it wasn't. I don't think I could live with that. Then let's make sure the parts that matter are real, I said, before I'd fully thought it through. Dottie's not wrong about us, Josie. She's just early. Josie went very still. Beckett, I know what I signed up for, I said. I'm telling you it stopped being that a while ago. You don't have to do anything about it right now. Your grandmother's in a hospital bed. I just needed you to know it wasn't just me carrying it alone anymore. She didn't answer, but she didn't move her head off my shoulder either, and I decided, right there in a plastic chair at 5 a.m., that I could live a long time on that particular kind of silence. Dottie stabilized. She'd be discharged in time for Founders Day if she took it slow, which meant Founders Day was still happening, which meant the whole town's biggest afternoon of the year was still coming, garnet ring and all. Grant, it turned out, hadn't left town because he had one more move to make, and he made it in the worst possible place. The gazebo stage at Founders Day, right before the mayor handed out the pie contest ribbons, in front of what had to be 300 people, Dottie included, sitting in a folding chair with an oxygen cannula and a proud, fragile smile on her face. Grant climbed up those gazebo steps like he'd been invited, took the microphone from a startled event volunteer, and said, loud enough to carry over the whole square, before this goes any further, I think this town should know that Josie Calloway's engagement isn't real. She hired this man. Sorry, asked him, whatever, to fool her sick grandmother. Ask him yourself. Ask him how long they've actually been together. The square went silent in that specific way a crowd goes silent right before it decides who to be angry at. Dottie's hand found the arm of her folding chair. Josie went white. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I don't do speeches. I build tables. But I have never in my life let somebody take a scared woman's dignity apart in public and just stood there sanding wood in my head about it. I walked up those gazebo steps. He's right that it started as a favor, I said, and I watched the square lean in, and I watched Josie's face brace for the worst. 6 weeks ago, Josie asked me to help her grandmother believe her granddaughter wasn't going to be alone. That part's true. Here's what Grant doesn't know. Because Grant left this town the second things got hard and never once came back until there was an angle in it for him. I looked at Josie. Somewhere around week 2, I stopped pretending. I don't know the exact day. I just know I started looking forward to diner arguments about bacon and salads more than I've looked forward to anything in years. I know I sat in a hospital waiting room at 5 in the morning because there was nowhere else on earth I'd rather have been. That's not a favor, Josie. That's just what's true now. You could have heard the pie contest ribbons drop. Josie stood up from her chair slow, like she wasn't sure her legs had gotten the memo, and she walked up those same steps, garnet ring catching the afternoon light, and in front of her grandmother and Grant Pruitt and half of Millbrook Falls, she said, he's not wrong. I asked the good man for a favor, and he gave me something I didn't know I still wanted. She turned to Grant. You should go. You were never any good at staying anyway. Grant left the stage to actual applause, which is a sentence I never thought I'd get to say about anyone. Dottie, from her folding chair, oxygen cannula and all, called out in a voice that cut through the whole square. Well, are you two going to kiss, or do I have to wait for the fall festival too? We kissed. Publicly, unrehearsed, in front of the entire town, and it was the first kiss in 6 weeks that had absolutely nothing written down anywhere about it. Dottie passed 8 months later, peacefully, at home, with Josie holding one hand and me holding the other. 2 weeks before she went, she pulled Josie close and told her the garnet ring had never really been about a fake engagement at all. She just wanted to see, before she ran out of time, whether her granddaughter still knew how to let somebody in. She said she'd known inside of a week that it wasn't fake anymore. Grandmothers, it turns out, are not easy to fool, even when you're trying. A year after Founders Day, I built Josie a ring box myself, out of the same walnut I'd been sanding the night she first walked into my barn. Inside it wasn't the garnet. That one lives in a frame on her dresser now, next to a photo of Dottie. It was a plain gold band I'd saved 4 months of shop profits for. I proposed in the barn, sawdust and all, no crowd, no script, no 6-week deadline. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence, which she still claims was practical, since she'd technically already said it once before in front of the whole town. We got married the next spring at the same gazebo. Dottie's chair sat empty in the front row, decorated with the same garnet ribbon Josie had worn in her hair on Founders Day, because some people you keep a seat for no matter what. I still build tables. I still keep quiet hours. But my Saturday nights involve a woman who argues with restaurant menus and a house that doesn't feel quiet anymore. It feels full. And every once in a while, sanding some new piece of walnut late at night. I think about a small blue box on my workbench and a woman brave enough to ask a favor of the one man in town who'd actually keep it, and then keep something bigger without either of us ever agreeing to that part out loud. If a friend ever slid a ring across the table and asked you to fake it for someone you loved, would you have said yes like I did? Tell me down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it still gets me how far these stories travel. If this one kept you company for a while, do me a kindness. Hit that like button so it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe and ring the bell, because I've got a brand new story like this one every week. Take care of each other out there. I'll see you in the next one.